Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming this Slate at this wonderful convention. I'm going to talk about Slate. And the talk is a clean slate, advanced GUI for your game in the Unreal Engine editor. Well, over the years of me working in this with this engine, I've heard a lot of really diverse and sometimes extreme opinions about like Slate or how low should you go when you're programming like your graphic user interface. So I hope that at the end of the talk you'll get some clarification on whether or when you want to use it and why. Okay, so a bit about me. I'm a programmer. Now I'm working at Ancient Studios. Before that I worked at QAD Games. At QAD we developed basically a middleware for programming AI behaviors, and we needed a lot of custom windows for debugging and configuration purposes for our plugin in Unreal Engine. Before that, I worked in Nowak. It's a small indie studio. Then I helped develop Intercosmos 2000 Metamorphosis. Intercosmos was a game on VR, so all of the UI there had to be in 3D space as just a texture on an object. So I got a fair bit of slice of these different ways to do UI and to like, present stuff to the user. So what I'm going to be talking about? Well, firstly, I'm just going to briefly explain what is Slate, what's the definition, and then we try to create some very simple Slate widget. Then I'm going to be like try to deepen that knowledge with like the most common macros that is used, because you're going to find out that the Slate is very macro dependent and macro heavy. That kind of tends to scare off some of the users. Then there will be some slides about using your Slate in the editor, and then some ways to test and debug it, because you will need to test your work, especially because there's no visual designer to like see your transition in real time. And then finally some of my like opinions and insight on what's worth doing and what should be done differently. All right, what is Slate? Slate is a completely entirely developed by Epic Games as a framework for graphic user interface. And that means that everything that is in the Unreal Engine, including the editor, including the Epic Games launcher, and including all the standalone programs that ship with the engine, are made entirely in Slate. That's why, if you remember, on the beginning of the Epic Games launcher, you often get crashes, and you got like your typical Unreal Engine process has crash log, because it was the same asset. All right. So what do I mean by that? I mean that whenever you have like any of your like widget, if it's in code or like in your widget blueprint, it's basically only a wrapper on like an underlying Slate class. You can see here I've chosen a button because it's a very common component. A button is basically a U button is basically a wrapper on S button, because all the Slate classes are prefixed with S letter. And so, well, all that U button does is propagate the changes you made in the editor to the Slate class. So this S button is also just some class. It's very simple, but please note that there is no U class macro there, because Slate is not managed by the engine, so you have to manage it yourself. But in most cases, just wrapping in a smart pointer works. But not always. So you should be worried that if you're trying to do something in Slate, it's your responsibility to free your memory, to reserve it, and to pass ownership. All right. So that's it for the boring theory. Let's just try to create something. I'm gonna show you how to create like a really simple widget, like you can see here. So when you first create a class, if you're using Rider or some plugin to Visual Studio or something, you'll probably get an option to auto-generate this class, and you will get something like this. It's a very simple class and has some big scary macro that I will talk about a bit later, and a single function called construct. It's a helpful command there that this class constructs our widget. Do not mistake it do not confuse it like I did when I started with a class constructor, because it is not a CPP C++ constructor. It's like a dedicated function to like create the widget. All right. I want to have an easy access to the button I will create in a bit, so I just declared a field of the class of type smart pointer, shared pointer to a button. So let's just create it. Okay. The construct function looks really simple, but it's also really confusing. So what is happening here? As a helper, I'm just gonna put the hierarchy here. So it's kind of weird, but it probably should make sense in a bit. Right now, there is something called the child slot. It's just something that this class has by default, and I'm just adding to it, creating a canvas, calling some very common Slate macro as new. What it does is basically it just creates a new Slate object of the class provided. Then I create a slot to that canvas and then put the button inside the slots. Meanwhile, I'm setting some parameters. For example, I want it to auto size, for the widget to automatically size themselves. And I set some anchors, everything you would do normally in widget blueprint. So yeah, when I have my button, I want to automatically assign it to the pointer I declared earlier in the header file, so I'm using another macro. The main difference is that it's assign new, so it automatically assigns it to a pointer provided in the first argument. And then finally, I'm creating a text that I'm putting inside these brackets, and then creating the text there. So you might wonder, well, is it still C++? Because it's kind of look like HTML a bit. If anyone here worked in like web development, you're probably way more familiar than someone that only worked in C++. So yeah, it is still C++, although a bit weird, but it will make sense in a bit because like to properly to help visualize this a bit, Epic decided that they want Slate to be created in a way that shows the hierarchy easier. So these brackets and these pluses are basically overridden operators that do a lot of really heavy stuff, but you don't have to use them. I suggest you do, but the same hierarchy can be created using like normal C++ functions. So if you were to analyze this code, but by the way, don't worry about like liking pictures or something. If you want to, then sure. But I will provide you the slides and this example after the talk. The brackets are basically overridden operator that attaches widget to an owner. You can see it like, let me just quickly use the as you can see it here. It's attaching the widget to the canvas, and then they attach the widget to the child slot. And the plus operator is basically adding a slot. But it's not all it does. For example, different classes, for different classes, these operators do different things. Mostly, the difference is whether or not this class can have a child of their own, or can have multiple children, or not at all. So you can use it like this. You can use just regular CPP if you really hate this HTML style layout. But I would recommend you like sticking to the layout that is more readable. All right. So now we need we created our widget, and now it's we should like add it to the screen. The simplest method there is. It's not the best most of the time, but the simplest way to add like some Slate class to the screen is just to get the game viewport and to just like add a Slate to it. And now, yeah, it works. It's very simple. It's nothing great, but it does work. And if we were to look at it with widget reflector, it has that hierarchy that we created. Right. So most of the time, you would want to wrap it with UMG because you won't probably have a use case that you need to have everything in Slate. You just probably want some specific like reusable component that you will then later use in the editor. So you can wrap it in the UWidget to then export it to the editor, to the widget blueprint, or just create it in UMG. It has the advantage or a disadvantage, depending on how you look at it, that the UMG is managed by the Unreal. So you just need to remember two things. First, you will need to have like some sort of way to access your your Slate class, most common way is to just have a pointer to it. And those two methods, raise Slate resources and rebuild widget, because they are called by the, well, as visual, it's the base class for everything UMG, slots and widgets, that in the raise Slate resources is called when this object is getting destroyed, and rebuild widget is called, like, well, all over the place, basically. But it is this function that is responsible for creating your class. So yeah, now it is just that simple. Now you have a usable component that you can pick and choose whenever you want to use it. But it is kind of empty. You can't control like anything right now. So it's not pointless. But when you export something to the user, to the like graphic designer of or just you as a programmer, but in Blueprints, you would probably want to have some control over it, what you create in Slate. So let's quickly add that. For example, here's a text block. You probably know that it has a multitude of options, of parameters for you to set, like the text that it shows, its appearance, it's whether or not it's wrappable or something like that. And it's also created in Slate and just exported to the editor. So here's some of the parameters of this huge macro I skipped over earlier in the S text block class. So you can see there are Slate attributes, Slate style arguments, Slate events, and like the Slate just arguments, all put in this like between begin and end Slate args. So I'm gonna explain some of it. Probably, if you have a very specific use case, you would want to like look in the engine code what the specific macro does, because there is a lot of them, a lot more that I will talk about here. So let's start from the simplest one, the Slate argument. Basically what it does, it takes our declared field. For example, here I want to control the button alignment on the screen. So I created a vector 2D called button alignment, and then I declared a Slate argument of type vector 2D with the same name. And what this macro, along with begin and end args, will do, it will create for us a function to automatically set it, and it will also create this argument here that I'm defaulting when initializing this widget. Note the underscore, because all of this, every argument you put in this macro will have the same name except with the prefix with an underscore. It's the Slate way of not duplicating the names, and so it could compile at all. All right, so that's basically it. Now I can put the button alignment here instead of some hard-coded value, and all of this argument will be available in this struct in args, so I can just like assign my button position to whatever it is what I declared I put in the constructor. And now when adding this widget to the screen or creating it in any other way, I can just specify this button alignment right here. So it's the same way I've done it in Slate. If I go back one slide, this is also a Slate argument or a Slate or some other Slate macro. And so, but this is the way to expose it to the editor. Also note that this is only used when the widget is created. So if you want to change this argument after this widget already exists, you need to propagate this change it down manually. But that's how the argument works. It's the simplest widget is also the lightest. So if you want to have replicated changes that propagate automatically, you would probably want to have a Slate attribute. If it was normal T attribute before, you're probably familiar with it, because it's basically a Slate version of an attribute. So I have declared the same button alignment but this time as a T Slate attribute with a templated type of vector 2D. And now notice that this is not the entire class. I've skipped over construct because it didn't fit on the screen, but note that this class got way heavier right now, because I needed to declare entire macro here at the top, Slate declare widget API. There's also a version without the API, if you do not need to specify it. And now I need the constructor to like initialize this T argument, T attribute, sorry. And what it does, it's also I need to in the CPP file I also need another huge macro. Like I did warn you that Slate is macro heavy, but all of this it can basically be copied from existing Slate classes. So if you ever get lost, just look at, for example, a slider or a S button, and just go through there. So now I get to in this function declared with this Slate implement widget, I have another function called register attributes, and now I can register this attribute. Note that I do need to specify the invalidate reason, because every time this attribute gets changed, the widget kind of needs to recalculate a bit, and what gets recalculated is specified here. And what it would mean if you ever have some argument exposed to the editor, and you have like some little bind like option next to it, and you can create a function to like bind some sort of, for example, Slate text, text block text, or like color or something. It would mean that you can assign this argument to be a function, not just a static value. But it would mean that every time this function is called, this Slate will need to update all of this stuff. Prepass is really expensive because the entire like Slate layout will need to be recalculated. That's why the programmers tell you that you don't use bindings too often, because like by default they are called every frame, and every frame when your widget needs to get recalculated probably multiple times, because all of the arguments will get all of these attributes will need to update like one after the other. It can get pretty heavy. And if you are doing Slate, it's either because you need component defined already in the engine, or you need that performance, and that's the easiest way to lose that performance. All right, so now in the actual constructor, I initialize arguments to some sort of static value. And in the construct function, I can just use this assign method that will take whatever I pass it here when created this widget. You can also combine it with like normal attributes via another macro called like bind property, but it's kind of a different topic. I did find some niche solution to it, because you could have, because the problem with normal UMG classes sometimes is that they kind of live longer than they should, and you can hack it a bit that you bind properties to like some sort of a helper class. So all of the properties all of the attributes are in a separate object. So now you have basically a guarantee that nothing will have a style reference to your UMG object, and it will get destroyed when it should have. All right. And the last thing I want to talk about is Slate event. Like I said, there are a lot more of this macro, but they work basically the same. And all of the changes that I didn't talk about, all of the other versions of this macro I didn't talk about are easily accessible via like looking just how Slate is made. So a Slate event is basically a macro that wraps a bit around a delegate. It's helpful to use it outside of just like declare it your delegate on your own, that it gets automatically bound to the Slate widget. And there's some other like really low-level stuff done to it that I didn't really realize until recently. For some sort of like memory optimization and like the position of this delegate. But what this means that when you export it to the widget, you can just bind however delegate. I've used another macro, but you can just use like have a static or any other delegate. It will work, but it will mean that you get it exposed to the editor. And for example, if you have on click on a button or a double click on text, you will have this little like events that you can just set it in blueprints and use it. All right. So sometimes you may need to create an object that doesn't really have a corresponding Slate component. For example, here is a Slate as slider, and it doesn't. Where before this class there was no slider, so you can see in the construct function there isn't any like Slate component added. All it does is like propagates this attribute when it's created down to store to its like fields. So how is it that I can see like a bar and like a handle that I can move around, and when this does nothing? So the other big function of Slate is on paint. So it's stripped down. It is not the entire class. It's way larger. But basically, what it does, it's like basically draws two boxes. So it's calls a function called make box on the main slider body, and then another on the handle. And that's how I want you to think about Slate. It's basically a very simple components that gets like stylized and like then they can drag to blueprint. But at the very low level, it's basically either a box or a text or a circle or some really basic shape that you can then morph and like extend into anything you want. So I think that's the main use case of Slate outside of performance or like really procedural stuff, that you probably want to have some component that you didn't have. For example, a slider with two handles to like specify a range. It's really easy. You're just adding a third box here for a second slider. Well, you would have to change all the functionality to handle like input on two handles instead of one. But in concept, it is really easy. So basically, that's it about Slate. Everything you can do from here, you can basically steal from the existing engine code. For example, if you want to have a really complex graph for some statistic, or like you have a colony and you want to have a summary for a player, you can just steal how the curve editor works and just like display it here. It's basically Bob's your uncle, just decode on the engine and do this stuff. Great. So what about the editor? When you create this Slate, it's kind of tempting if you know Slate and you have some really custom stuff that you want to customize. You might want to hook up your custom windows to it. There are a few methods of doing this. I will talk about the most common. In my opinion, is to have your custom category in detail customization, because every asset that is editable has something called detail customization. Is an interface that creates all of the editable options in the editor. So, for example, blueprint, or like a behavior tree, or state machine, or animation. All of these details panel derive from this single interface. So we can really create our own. It's only just those two functions you need to worry about. Make instance is just like really simple. You just like create a shared pointer, shared reference. Sorry, and the customer details is the function when you actually create your stuff. Note that this is also not the entire class, because I've only focused on the Slate part of it. You would also need to hook up to like respond to whatever user does to your Slate, because I've like created here that this row. This row that is it's the same hierarchy. Is just I put this class in the editor module, but you would probably need to like hook up whenever I click this button that will be shown that will be shown like in the next few slides. That probably something should happen to some parameter of my class. Okay, so once I have this my details, I would want to assign it to some class I want this to apply to. So you do that. You can do it dynamically, but then you would have to worry about the asset load times and what happens between them. So I recommend you just do it with in your module startup. So I'm just calling register custom class layout on whatever class this is, and yeah, then I just creating this layout I've created earlier, and yeah, now whatever this actor of this asset is, it has my custom category with the Slate widget. The advantage of this is that, well, oftentimes you would have multiple of parameters. For example, if you have an encounter generator and you have like 3 types of encounter types, and like there's a 2D position of the screen, then you could have like 10 different floats to it, and you can just have like simple window when you can drag around some sort of question mark on something, and it will like propagate this trending down to the properties of this asset. So that's in my opinion the one of the 2 main lines. The other one is just to have a tab spawner. It's whatever this. It's either as a button on the top bar of your lever editor, or as of this like collapsible tabs when the widget refactor of the other tools are. You can also like create your your tab spawner and then just assign it to like create your own widget, and yeah, then whatever this widget does probably should be listened to by something, and whenever user does something to the interactable object, then you should like respond to it correctly. Well, there you can also like have the entire asset editor, or have custom like functionality when you right-click an object on the scene, but that's kind of really complex and outside of this stack. But I recommend you look into it, because it can be really fun of digging out the engine and seeing what is going on there, because there are some weird stuff there. Right, if everything fails, you can also at any time just add a window. But if you need to resort to like manually adding a window, you should rethink what you're doing and probably use the area methods, because, well, I mean, maybe you have some really specific example, but I didn't really encounter anything that would require just manually popping a window open. Okay, why do I even talk about it? Because when you extend the editor, most of the time, there's this cool feature called edit-related widgets. You have QR to the documentation link here. Most of the time, you can manage with just this widget that you can like create entirely in blueprints, and like everything that you would ever want to do with will be here, and often just like marking a function to be callable in the details panel, or just creating it as a command in the terminal, it's fine. But when you have like some sort of asset editor of config, you can also package it with your game, and then have, for example, already made like a map editor. Because if you're creating or an encounter editor, like we talked about earlier, because if you want to like allow users to like create their own game, you kind of already did the work. So why not just allow them to do so? But like I said, it's probably not worth to create an entire new Slate like architecture to support your changes when you can just like use the editor utility widget. But sometimes it is. So it is. You should probably just look what how the different asset editors are done, and like propagate those changes on to your case. All right. So how to debug it and how to test it. My favorite tool is widget refactor. We also have a QR code here. It's wonderful because, well, it does different stuff, and it's needed because there is no visual designer to Slate. So if you need to see your changes, you need to like recompile. And even with Live++, with quite quick right now compile times on hot reload, the iteration times are really slow. So between iterations, we want to get as much info as you can. So this widget refactor tool allows you to do just that. It can show you the entire hierarchy of all of the widgets that are currently on the screen, along with their options. You can also change the parameters that you expose there. For example, if I have an image, I can change the actual image in runtime, and then see, okay, what's it look like right now. or whether or not it will scale properly or stuff. You can also kind of simulate input, though this is not the correct tool in my opinion to do that, but in a pinch it might just save your life. You can also use it in a shipped game. Well, maybe not shipped, but in a build. Whenever or not you have like the debug options open, just whether or not because it's a standalone program that ships with the engine, so you can either like just input the correct command. It's also in the documentation, or just like open this project and hook it up to your game, to your process manually. You can also create snapshots to look at them later. So if you notice something weird, you can just quickly like take a snapshot of the entire UI in your game, and like then just analyze it on your own time. So it's really great. I recommend you use it, even if you're not using Slate, because it's useful even to see if someone, for example, like put something like some invisible object over your button, and now you can enter a new game because something is bothering, and you can just quickly say, okay, so there's something that shouldn't be here. Right. There's also counters and traces. That can be really helpful if you're debugging, especially for performance, or if you like don't know why something is happening when it shouldn't. So right now it's kinda there are kinda documented as part of Slate Insights overview. I mean kinda because there are not really, but you can see in code how they are created and create your own. There are also more generic scoped counters, but keep in mind that they're quite heavy and they have quite a noticeable overhead of their own. So if you like want to like measure some performance of a like really quick function, you might introduce more slowdown to it than it is worth the hassle. But declaring it and like looking at it it's simple. So if you need it, then it's there for you. And there's also something called automation driver. It's another tool in the engine that allows you to completely simulate user input. Right now, it is kind of a headache to get it working with gamepad, because you basically have to like write your gamepad input simulation, and it's kind of weird because like the X input is. I mean, in the editor, it's kind of using the first X input device, and so when you simulate it, when you like fire up the automation driver, you cannot hook it up correctly. But for mouse and keyboard, it works right out of the box, and like it has extra functionality to really quickly find some Slate object on your screen and like do some actions to it. So. If you were gonna test something, so I recommend you like add an ID to your Slate object, like whatever you wanted to. In our example area, I just added a metadata to my widget button, and then I created a test. It's not the entire test. I'm using spec. Spec is a type of test. It will be more of this. More about spec will be in a bit. But basically, what I do is I create a new window and just like fill it up with my Slate widget that I want to test, and then I create a sequence in an automation driver. The sequence basically just says to locate this button with this ID I've declared earlier, and just press the left mouse button once you're on it. And yeah, and then I just check that I'm doing really stupid check whether this button is pressed. And yeah, and that will work. You can see that this text took like 0.2 of a second. The main, the most of the time it took it because it had to create a window. So this test is really quick, and you can automate it. You can hook it up to your CI. And the cool thing about it, there's like 124 tests of this automation driver that showcase every possibility. Every type, every way you can like search for a specific object, whether or not is this by ID or by type or by some random tag or by like location under cursor, and like every keyboard button you can also like test shortcuts or like everything the user can do on your mouse and keyboard you can do it here. So if you're interested in automating tests, in automation tests and like graphing user interface tests, this is the driver for you. Also, this works on widget blueprints, but not really. because I had varied results, because you can search by path. For example, if I have a button, I can like put a tag to it in Blueprints, not entirely in Slate, and then I can just try to find it by tag. But I had varied result because like randomly it would just not find it. So I have no idea why. Sorry, I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the reason before that tag, but. You can test your blueprints there, but expect varied results. All right, so when should you use it? The main argument here is that it's more performant. Well, it's true, but that's not really the problem. So before you decide that you should rewrite your entire interface into Slate, first check that you're following the guidelines. Checked if you're, for example, have a really heavy keyboard operation that happens every time that's captured by Slate. Also, like maybe you have like animation that's going every frame on like some invisible widget. But if you do, sorry, I did some quick tests to see how much performant Slate is. This is like a really simple widget. It just creates a matrix of n by n matrix of like images. Images like here it does a box in the S image is also S box, and just like whatever matrix this is, I compared the entire time it took to render those laced object with the equivalent in UMG blueprints and like and widget blueprints. So it was about 0.5 of a second on the matrix 12 by 12, so 144 widgets on the screen. Note that they were static though, so it's only half a millisecond, so it really wouldn't be worth to convert that type of widget to Slate. But when I added a simple keyboard operation, not just simple mouse operation, so whenever the mouse cursor is hovering, this image gets slightly highlighted, slightly bigger, the performance difference rose up to like 3 milliseconds. So the heavier your widget, the heavier your architecture, the probably more reason to switch over to Slate. But in my experience, Slate UI in general is usually not the heaviest system in your game, so you probably don't need to do that. But if you have something really heavy, then yeah, that's sometimes the only option. All right, so the other things that you may or may not use Slate is you can't really do complex procedural animation in blueprints, because for simple animations it is really useful, really comfortable to just use a sequencer and just like, for example, enlarge a button and drop it down. But for example, if you want to create an animation that the letters will fall down to something, no matter its shape or the text, I don't think it will be possible in like widget blueprint without like splitting every individual letter into like another widget. And it's well easier in Slate because you can just like draw different text boxes and like overwrite on Paint and like do it there. For example, if you had like a button that need to like morph into something other on the screen that you don't know what it is, in this designer, it's also like better to use slider. And the animation created in Slate will be cheaper than the ones used in the one created in like widget blueprint, because they don't use the sequencer. Also, you can propagate those changes to like your standalone programs. And I did see an argument that if you know Slate, you can like create a platform agnostic application, but I really don't recommend it, because like Slate, you need to ship at least some of the engine with your Slate application. So unless you're making tools for the engine, it's really not worth it compared to like every other like GUI platform I found, whether or not it's just like in GUI, Avalonia, or even like with this presentation format. So yeah, it is better to learn those. But sometimes like if you're doing something like close to the engine, you might want to like learn or like do something in Slate just so you can export it to a standalone program. Yeah. Also, if sometimes you have like a really complex behaviors that you just can't, or it's really a pain to create in in the like UMG graph, UMG like classes, or in the like designer in the blueprint. So sometimes it is your only options, but please do not like go after this talk and go to your project manager. Hey guy or hey girl, we're going to like move all our UI to Slate now because I heard it's cheaper, it's more performant, and it's easier to test. Yeah, you probably don't need to do that, but if you do, just look how it's done in the engine and recreate those changes. Right, so this is the sources I've used. I recommend, whether or not you're using Slate, I recommend a website called Ben UI. It's a dude called Ben. He does really good work, like exposing and showcasing different stuff. Not entirely in the UI, although it is most of his work. And yeah, also the main like research I did into this talk, which was us digging around the engine, because like the documentation is often lacking, and it is your like most truthful source of information. Right. So if you have any questions and you don't want to ask them here, like reach out to me. And yeah, here's a QR code to this presentation if you want examples. And thank you.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for a really insightful presentation.
You're welcome.
I think me and others have seen like the new development debugging tools for UI, and I'm really grateful for this. And my question, I think, will be from a perspective of person who is not really quite working with UI, and I would love maybe to try understand it better. Like maybe if you could give some examples, like how you use it at your job, where like my project can benefit from Slate, like what exactly and how the structure in your company works for Slate widgets. Like how do you make decisions which widgets will be made with Slate? I probably guess that, like as you mentioned, it's performance. Like it depends on performance. But also, like, if we are talking about base widgets, if creating base widgets with Slate, wouldn't it also be convenient, for example, if we are assigning different, like the same style to different elements of the Slate widget? For example, not going simpler and using common UI plugin like that. I just would love to get more context how you use Slates in your job.
Yes. So we actually don't use Slate because of performance. We use Slate on the project I'm working on for the ease of like reusable elements. For example, a slider with two handles, or we have some skill icons that we really want to find a way to like put an indicator to a user that they have a new skill to be unlocked, and we found that just like overriding this decorator in Slate and just created a simple decorated like in Slate and just like drawing it over the image is like the best solution for us. But for your, if I understand your question correctly, you don't really used to use Slate. Okay, yeah. So yeah, don't use Slate as your first first UI. Common UI is a good plugin. Remember, it's still like experimental as of under 5.3. I don't know if 5.4 it changed, but yeah, it is a good way to unify your style and your behavior. Well, most of the time, if you need to use Slate, you will have a problem you can solve otherwise. So. First thing you should do if you have like if you're stuck on something, just Google it, and we probably will be a solution that doesn't require this going this deep.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. So if there are another questions, I got kind of stressed earlier and forgot to thank the wonderful people on Nashar who listened to like the first version of this talk, and believe me, it was much worse. So yeah, thank you to them for bearing with me and like giving me some insightful information. And yeah, thank you.